A moth goes into a podiatrist's office, and the podiatrist says, "What's the problem?" The moth says, "Where do I begin with my problems? Every day I go to work for Gregory Vasilovich, and all day long I toil. But what is my work? I am a bureaucrat, and so every day I joylessly move papers from one place to another and then back again. I no longer know what it is I actually do, and I don't even know if Gregory Vasilovich knows. He only knows that he has power over me, and this seems to bring him much happiness. And where is my happiness? It is when I awake in the morning and I do not know who I am. In that single moment, I am happy. In that single moment, before the memory of who I am strikes me like a cane, and I take to the streets and walk in a malaise here and then there and then here again. And then it is time for work. Others stopped asking me what I do for a living long ago, for they know I will have no answer and will fix my empty eyes upon them, and they fear my melancholia might prove so deep as to be contagious. Sometimes, Doc, in the deepest dark of night, I awake in my bed and I turn to my right, and with horror I see some old lady lying on my arm. An old lady that I once loved, Doc, in whose flesh I once found splendor and now see only decay. An old lady who insults me by her very existence. My daughter, Alexandria, fell to the cold of last winter. The cold took her as it did many of us. And so my family mourned. And I placed upon my countenance the look of grief, Doc, but it was a masquerade. I felt no grief for my dead daughter, but only envy. And so I have one child, a boy, whose name is Stefan Mikhailovich Smoknogravichkov. And I tell you now, Doc, with great and deep shame, the terrible truth, I no longer love him. When I look into his eyes, all I see is the same cowardice that I see when I catch a glimpse of my own eyes in the mirror. It is this cowardice that keeps me living, Doc, that keeps me moving from place to place, saying hello and goodbye, eating though hunger has long left me, walking without destination, and at night lying beside the strange old lady in this burlesque of a life I endure. If only the cowardice would abate for the time needed to reach over and pick up the cocked and loaded pistol that lies on my bedside table. Then I might finally end this facade once and for all. But alas, the cowardice takes no breaks. It is what defines me. It is what frames my life. It is what I am. And yet I cannot resign myself to my own life. Instead, despair is my constant companion as I walk here and then and there, without dreams, without hope, and without love. Moth, says the podiatrist, your tale has moved me, and it is clear you need help. But it is help I cannot provide. You must see a psychiatrist and tell him of your troubles. Why on earth did you come to my office? And the moth says, because the light was on. Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Why do I tell this my favorite joke, which was written down in a book called Based on a True Story?
Oh my God, of course that's your favorite joke.
It's my all-time favorite joke.
But go on, Dave. I have things to say. Continue.
That is a joke, one of the great jokes told by Norm Macdonald, who we found out died yesterday after a long battle, a secret battle with cancer. Or not, that word battle, just affliction.
Yeah.
And yeah, the world lost a great one there. He was, I admired him greatly, but mainly he just made me laugh. And you have like David Letterman and Conan O'Brien saying he was, all of the stand-ups agree he was the best of the best. And I just thought I'd open it up with that, because there'll never be a better time to inflict the moth joke on our listeners'
this is the thing.
ears.
When Dave and I worked in youth ministry together, there are two things he was famous for. They're both just horrible, horrible jokes. And one of them was called the whale joke, which if we have any former Focus students listening, they'll know exactly what that was, and it was awful. And then the other one was exactly like the moth joke. It just went on and on and on and on. And the punchline was what I've always wanted a pumpkin head. Was that the punchline? It just was terrible.
You're going to murder it. It's called the Pumpkinhead joke, and it's a thing of great beauty and brilliance. And I had never even heard the moth joke when that joke came to me. I didn't write that joke.
Otherwise, it would have been the moth joke. Yeah.
Otherwise,
Oh my God, it's the same thing. But I didn't. So I was. I didn't realize until I saw it that Norm Macdonald was a Christian. I had no idea about that, and it was interesting. You know, Sarah, we were talking about it yesterday, and Sarah, you can say more about this. But the fact that he got kind of canceled for being unwilling to cancel other people was interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. It really was. But also, like, of course, then it was like, he's not, then the narrative of he's not paying enough attention or being sensitive enough to victims. And then there was just like profuse apology coming from him, genuine apology, which is also incredibly Christian.
Yes.
Of course, he still was like canceled from being on Jimmy Fallon's show, regardless, because it doesn't matter in the culture that we live in how much you apologize, So, it was. It's funny though now when people die. Which is always funny.
Hilarious.
He would have appreciated that. You have to Google them before you put up anything nice about them, I think. Because inevitably, I was like sitting there because, RJ, you had shared in our group text that just beautiful last stand-up he did on David Letterman, and I was like, oh my gosh. And the quote it's just so beautiful, and I was like, I have to share this, A, because I want people to see it, but B, because it reminded me so much of my dad loved Norm Macdonald. I was raised on stand-up, would not be a preacher if it weren't for stand-up. And I was like, but I feel like he did something. Before I put it up, I was like, what did Norm Macdonald do? I feel like he got in trouble. Something. So I literally Googled Norm Macdonald scandal, right? And then realized what he got in trouble for was basically not, deciding that we're going to cast all these people into the outer darkness of hell. So anyway, it was sort of an interesting, like, I loved, and I did share the post. I just thought it was so beautiful, but it's funny when people die now, you've got to, before you say anything positive about them, you've got to be like, what's their sin? You know what I mean? Like, what's the calculation here for me? Is this worth me sharing, or will people take me down for like giving any sort of like love to this person, right?
Give the quote, Sarah. Give the quote from the Dave Letterman stand-up.
I have it because I texted it to our girl. Josh and I were just blown away.
This was what the setup is, that he's David Letterman's favorite comedian of all time, and it was Letterman's final show, and he got to choose who he wanted, and he wanted Norm to do a set, and so he gives this incredible set, and then Sarah.
Oh no, don't apologize. It's so beautiful. Well, and right before he says this, he talks about the first time that he saw David Letterman, and he gets choked up. And
he can barely make it through. Yeah. As a kid in Canada, I guess, right? He grew Canadian. Yeah.
And it just, as someone, he said, I love stand-up. And as someone who loves stand-up, I was just like, oh, it was so moving. But he said this to David Letterman. He was talking about, what a remarkable late night host David Letterman is, and how he's so great at his job, and how he loves him. And he said, I know you're not basically into sentimentality, but he said, if something is true, it is not sentimental. And I say in truth that I love you. It's just.
And Dave is like
through tears.
He can't. Yeah. And Dave is like, you see it. It's a moment of such, candid, authentic emotion. Like he didn't see it coming. He didn't know what was happening. And Norm is never serious about anything. I mean, Norm is always amusing himself at the cost of everyone else. And so to get that moment of direct sentiment is just so, I don't know. You look at the YouTube comments under that, and everyone's like, "I came here to cry today." It's also the funniest. It's after this stuff he does about Germany, which is
which is so good.
It's so funny.
It's so funny.
And I he was just his own man in a lot of ways, and sometimes he would have these long threads on Twitter before he quit Twitter or before he was made or whatever. But Norm was. What always fascinated me about Norm was that he's one of these people that as you dug into stand-up, if you cared about that, you'd find out that a lot of these great stand-up comedians considered him to be the best. Like it was, they consider sort of Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor and Norm. And so Steve Martin thought that way. Jerry Seinfeld thought that way. Sarah Silverman thought that way. They were all sort of saying
a comics comic.
He's a comics comic. I was like, what does that mean? And then you sort of go down the rabbit hole of watching these talk show clips of him winding everyone up, and like the watching Conan O'Brien react to him tell the moth joke, or watching Letterman deal with it. Like, no one can contain themselves, and that kind of reflexive laughter to me is so human, and it's so genuine. And Norm had it in spades, and he never stopped. It was always, you got the sense it would probably be impossible to live with the man, but it was really, that was so touching, RJ. I'm so glad you sent that to us.
Yeah.
Well, how are you guys doing? Otherwise, what's been a few weeks because there's some illness. So you guys are not feeling so hot, but you recovered. What's the latest in the Condon household?
Well, I mean, like, we had a storm come through yesterday and lost power all day, which is just like par for the course. I don't know. I mean, it's I went over to a friend's house. Josh went into the office. Kids went place, like, they're old enough. We kind of all found our place for the day, but it does feel a little relentless when we're in hurricane season. And you guys know I have a brother that lives in New Orleans, so it's like anytime a hurricane comes, we're always like, which one of us is it gonna hit? Which is pretty unpleasant. So yeah, but we're better today. Power's back on. Kids are in school. It's just yeah, I mean, one thing that's happened for me with grief is that this is like way more therapy stuff than you guys probably need to hear, but I tend to disassociate pretty easily. And so I have to I really do have like a routine I have to get into, which I guess is everybody right now because everyone lives in trauma. But last night it was like, you're back in your house. The power's back on. You can make dinner, kind of
small
like
victories.
Yeah, because you're just like, what's happening?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Ugh. Gosh, I mean, as if you've had enough, not just grief, but hurricane activity to last 3 lifetimes, it feels like.
We really have, but it's just, we're at this point, we're kind of, I don't know. I keep having that thing run through my head. I feel like I've said on here before, but, I had somebody in my life tell me that their child had a lot going on. Their family had a lot going on. Like, this isn't normal. This isn't a normal childhood. And I'm just like, I feel like that's probably normal. I don't know.
Yeah, let's expand our idea of normalcy. I think that's
I mean, I feel like we were living in the glory days for about 150 years, and we're just going back to
I had that exact same thought.
Like the shuttle, you know what I mean? With like chickens and like brainstorms and plagues. Like, I feel like we're just going back to what actually it was like
the
for
baseline.
Most of the yeah, exactly. So I'm like, I don't know.
Rutger, how about you?
We're okay. Jamie's stepmom did pass away last week.
I'm so sorry.
Which was hard, and really hard on her father. And so she just spent a ton of time on the phone with her siblings and step siblings. And she reminded me recently, like, she's like, RJ, it was a month ago that all these people in my family got COVID. And so it's really been a month of, I don't know, trauma or drama or just, it's been sort of exhausting.
Yeah.
And then just, work wise, we're starting back Sunday school back up this week and trying to, I don't know, recapture some sense of normalcy, even as infection rates in South Florida, which have crested and they're coming down, but they're still pretty high. So, I'm sure, everyone can relate to that. Just it's very hard to make decisions, and it's decision fatigue also, constantly having to pivot, constantly having to try new things. I think it is comforting for me when I talk to other people, because sometimes you can get in your own little space and think it's just you, and then you talk to somebody else who, either works or has kids, and everyone's going through the exact same thing. It's like, oh yeah, it's not my fault that I can't come up with a perfect solution for everything. It doesn't seem to be possible right now. So and I did get a little cold last week, which is a bit of a bummer. But we're okay. I will say bright spots. Well, first of all, our littlest boy turns 5 tomorrow. He's very excited, and he's doing well, and he's happy in school. And our oldest son, in college, is having a really good year. He's finally having a college, I think, experience and making friends and having fun. And he was worried about going back because last year was so, difficult. So there's some highs, some lows, but as we all are, we're ready to get back to normal and wondering if it's ever going to come.
Yeah.
It's not.
Don't say that. Don't say that. Don't say that. I have some thoughts. We're not there yet.
We're going to talk a little bit about.
I'm not ready to give up quite yet. Maybe I should. Maybe I just need to give up.
I'm doing okay. It's this season of all this a lot happening. We got Melina Smith and Naya Kiso, star of Storymakers, are in town right now visiting to sort of check in with sort of the mothership of Mockingbird, and that's always a joy to have people from out of town. And but I'm sprinting to try to finish the manuscript that I've been working on, and I'm getting really excited about it. And but it's also it's just more than I can handle right now, with also church obligations and lots of kid activity and all sorts, trying to, plan the next season for Mockingbird itself. So, I'd say that in 2 weeks when we record again, I like to think a lot of these things will have passed, but I'm sure I'll be dealing with other stressful things.
The sun will come out tomorrow.
I honestly have gotten so much joy in the last 24 hours from rewatching all this Norm Macdonald stuff, which I love so much.
Oh,
yeah, that's
I'm
good.
so glad.
That's good.
Yeah.
And just for being reminded of what a gift humor is and how much it means to me. So we're going to jump in. We've got some great things to talk about today. The first one is there's a new book out by Will Storr, who's a British journalist who I quote in Seculosity, actually. He wrote a little editorial for The Guardian called "We All Play the Status Game, but Who Are the Real Winners?" And he says that in his opening, he says humans are programmed by evolution to be obsessively interested in status, and that this obsession is powerful enough to overcome the will to achieve equality, truth, or the sense of generous compassion for our rivals. He says, we play games for status incessantly and automatically. No matter where you might travel, from the pre-modern societies of Papua New Guinea to the skyscraper forests of Tokyo and Manhattan, you'll find it. In the developed world, we play political games, religious games, corporate games, sports games, cult games, legal games, fashion games, hobby games, video games, charity games, social media games, racial, gender, and nationalist games. The variety feels infinite. Within these groups, we strive for individual status, for acclaim from our co-players. But our groups also compete with rival groups in status contests. Corporations battle corporation, football teams battle football teams. When our team wins status, we do too. When they lose, so do we. These games form our identity. We become the games we play. They're built into our brains. Part of how we experience reality. It is simply not possible to opt out of it, but we can decide which games we choose to play. Then he goes on to say, humans are extraordinarily imaginary creatures who use almost anything to symbolize status. Money, Twitter followers, literary tastes, power, the brand of watch, or the shape of a stomach. In the 1948, the anthropologist William Bascom published an account of a status game on the Micronesian island of Pohnpei that was played with yams. The man with the largest yam at a feast would be declared number one and praised by the chief for his generosity.
Yam envy.
The men I knew you'd go there. The men of Pohnpei would furiously compete for this position, raising around 50 yams a year in secret, remote, overgrown plots that they'd creep out of bed at 2 a.m. to tend to. A single yam could take 10 years to grow, reach more than 4 meters in length, weigh over 90 kilograms, and require 12 men to carry into the feast using a stretcher. I'll go on, but status games, does this resonate at all?
No, I have no idea what you're talking about.
How many people are coming to your church, RJ?
I don't keep track.
Sarah, how many followers do you have on Facebook? How many?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, like, I made this joke in the latest magazine when I had to do I got to do the advice article,
which is amazing,
really
amazing. Dear Gracie.
It was fun to do, but it is true that whenever someone gets a job and they announce it on Facebook, and it literally does not matter what the job is, okay? Like, not even in my sphere of expertise, like, you got manager of Applebee's, you're CEO of, like, a tech company or whatever, I'm like, I should have gotten that job. Like, every time, like, something in my brain's like, do they not know about me? You know, like, it's so dark and scary. But this is very reassuring to me because I do, I think there is definitely, it's reassuring to me that it's like that the writer wasn't like, it's an American problem. It's literally wired into our brains.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The thing I would say is like the deep grief, the season of deep grief that we find ourselves in, that I find myself in, is it gives you a reprieve from that.
From the games?
I don't know how long it'll last. Would love if it just lasted indefinitely. Mm-hmm. But I have noticed that there are things that have been gifts to me of grief that are already going away. So, chances are if you become manager of Dairy Queen, I'm going to be jealous in a year, But
my mother used to send me little clips from my hometown newspaper about high school classmates and like amazing things they were doing. And
Hillary.
I'm like, Mom, please don't ever send one of those ever
would do that
again.
Too. Yeah.
I'm like, I don't care. It only makes me feel insecure. Please don't do this.
But RJ, you should get the ones from my high school. It would make you feel better. Okay.
Yeah, mine was like, just became managing director at Goldman Sachs, and her husband, world-renowned ceramicist, and their two. I'm just like, Jesus, that literally was a clip she sent me a few years ago. I was like, please don't ever do this again. I wish I could say that I feel like I've had a reprieve from the status game, but I don't. I feel like I've been trying really hard to win the pandemic. It's just another.
Like, my church is gonna come out of this even bigger,
even stronger. We're gonna build back better, baby. But I would say it's 100%. Like, sure. It has been a rough few weeks. I'm gonna just make a confession that's gonna make it's gonna be a humble brag, which I'm hoping will make me look bad. We had like a diocesan clergy meeting or whatever, and we're going over the budget for the coming year, and they're showing all the numbers from the various churches and the stewardship numbers, and our church did well in stewardship. Like, we were one of only a few churches that were up last year, and we were up more than any other church. And I'm like, we won the pandemic, and suddenly I felt pretty good for about an hour. You know what I mean?
And then you were overcome with the same emptiness.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, writing in Unheard, Ed West was reviewing this book, and he talked about how just like our lust for status is simply insatiable, especially compared to even something like power. But he does say that the need for status can be beneficial, as we all know. If he says, visit any major art gallery and you will see the result of intense competition in late medieval Italy, where rival families hired the greatest artists and architects to raise their status. In 18th century Britain, membership of clubs and societies became a social marker, the result being that the number of learned societies rose from 50 in 1750 to 1,500 in 1850, with an enormous impact on education levels, wealth, and a variety of other measures. But then he says, but just as often, status games, as we know, can be toxic and do dreadful things to people, especially if religion, politics, or some other marker of identity are involved. I've long believed that political beliefs work as status markers and have become more so in recent decades as other signals have declined in importance. People will adopt positions not just out of sincerity, partisan loyalty, or conformity, but because they signal social status. Now, these said something that very interesting that I did not know of. The polling shows that a dislike of modernist architecture is one of the few things that every demographic agrees on. Black, white, Asian, male, female, rich, poor, young, and old, they all prefer the more vernacular style of architecture. The one section of society which disagrees happens to be architecture students. And the longer someone has been studying architecture, the more pro-modernist their views. That suggests that an opinion has become a status signal, marking the sophisticate out from the hoi polloi. He says the same process is clearly at work behind social media-led bullying. They are always framed in terms of he's just talking about how this is usually this sort of status games. You compete in them out of some like a sort of Augustinian, like a sort of misdirected good. He said people on social media are always framing their bullying of others in terms of protecting the weak, the urge to care and protect from harm. But the more people imagine themselves to be aiding the vulnerable, the more horrendous their behavior, giving them free rein to commit what Jonathan Sacks has called altruistic evil. People do terrible things more out of love than out of hate. But it is also a status game, the aim being to seek the maximal removal of their opponent's status, ideally reputational death.
Cancellation.
Well, I don't know if that word has become so loaded, but it's like, it seems to be.
Yeah.
I know you get canceled if you talk badly about cancel.
I know.
I
talked about
Giddy up.
I preached a sermon recently about defilement and, Mark 7 and Jesus saying what goes into a person. I said, I think that we see a lot of concern about defilement on campus because we're right here, and it's often talked about as quote unquote cancel culture. I think the better term is catharsis culture, because you're trying to expel or purge some sort of stain, usually some perceived stain. And Alan Jacobs has talked about it. I think it's a really helpful way to view it. But of course, a lot of people came up to me afterwards and they sort of said, well, I hope you don't get canceled for talking about cancel culture, because that's our context. There's like other contexts where if I didn't talk about it, people would be upset. So it was very remarkable.
So fun to be a preacher in 2021.
It's just really fun. But anything else about status games, love, hate?
Well, yeah,
games.
Everyone
RJ
has a need to feel that they're worth something. Everyone has a need to win some kind of game, right? That if we're losing one game, we need to then change the game and find a game that we can win. And as one of these people says in their article, if there's no game you can find to win, if you just feel like you're a loser on every level, it has really dire consequences for your mental health and your sense of
your physical health. Your physical health, actually.
Yeah. Whereas it's ironic that the lectionary reading this week is the one where the disciples are arguing about which one of them is the greatest.
Yeah.
They're playing the status game, and of course what we the search for worth via status is ultimately a total shell game, right? It doesn't work. And what the Christian answer to it is that we find our sense of worth not in status but in belovedness, right? That we are loved unconditionally and eternally, in spite of the fact that we lose, that we're losers, and that Jesus is willing to lose every single status game imaginable for our sake. So I get it and I do it, and we're never going to be cured of our desire for status, I guess, until we just completely bottom out, and then we'll get rid of it for a week or two.
Or unfortunately, it's something terrible.
Then it'll come roaring back.
The only way to get rid of it is how, unfortunately, it was gotten rid of for our dear friend Sarah.
All I can think about though is like, Dave, I think I said this to you on the phone, but Also, I just want to like occasionally say, like, if you listen to the podcast and you're like, oh my God, Sarah's really horrible. Like, yeah. and don't feel bad for thinking it. I remember talking, I think I told you this, Dave, like when I was starting Grief Group. And I was like, Dave, am I going to win Grief Group?
Totally. I'm going to grieve the you-know-what out of this.
I didn't lose just one parent, you know?
And then just heads up, people had it much worse than I did, okay? Like, I did not win. So, yeah, no, I find this, I mean, it is the thing that frustrates people about Mockingbird. I'm just going to say it. And it is also the reason why it's my theological home. We will never escape our sin this side of the heavenly veil.
Yeah, no way.
We will be reassured of forgiveness, which also means that we have to acknowledge that we're sinners. And I find so much relief in that. And I love when a low anthropology just slams right into science because it's like, it's a relief. Like, okay, people who live in totally other countries with completely different cultures are also like longing to, you know, win yard of the month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marxism won't solve this problem.
Right.
No, and this is, I mean, we talk about it oftentimes in forms like status games are usually governed by the law. Like if you win, if your lawn is, you know, manicured enough, then you will sort of win. You'll be on top. Right. And what we find out is that, you know, there's always someone with a nicer lawn than yours. And if you do win, though, you better, you know,
you better keep it up.
You better keep it up. Your church better get even higher stewardship that next year. RJ, how are you going to do it?
Well, I felt that actually. I watched an interview, to bring it back to sports, with Naomi Osaka. You know, last year's U.S. Open champion who went through all that stuff with Serena Williams, where Serena behaved badly. Was that last year or 2 years ago? I can't remember. Time is such a weird thing. But this year, you know, she's really struggled with her mental health. She dropped out of Wimbledon, then she played the U.S. Open. She ended up losing to Leylah Fernandez, who made the finals, as a lot of top players did. But she came into her press conference, and she said, she just cried. And she's like, I don't know what to do. She's like, there's no joy in winning anymore. Winning only feels like relief. It feels like a relief.
Yeah.
And when I lose, I just get really, really sad. Yeah. And it doesn't feel normal. And I don't know what to do. And I'm not sure the next time I'm going to play tennis.
Oh my goodness.
And I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
Coming back, so there was something about coming back after my vacation this summer. This is going to sound weird. I felt the pressure of perfection to the degree where I felt like my first few sermons back, I was manuscripting my sermons more than I ever do. You know, like reading them off the page, and I felt like there was something wrong. And I was realizing this drive for perfection in myself. Like, this has to be perfect. I have to get this right. There's no freedom to fail, and it just felt dead to me. Yeah. You know, so this past Sunday, I finally just tried, you know, I had a few notes, but I tried to preach more extemporaneously, and it just felt so much better, even though it was a lot scarier, and trying to shove away that need to get everything exactly right, to win. You know, if you feel like you've been winning, you just want to you got to keep winning. Like, God forbid, you know, you preach a bad sermon. God forbid you lose a tennis match. You know, God forbid you lose one of these status games that you use to define yourself. Yeah. And there's no freedom in that. It's just slavery and darkness. Because you can't keep it up. But
let me also say, Leylah Fernandez was incredible. Like, that was,
oh yeah,
that was an amazing U.S. Open.
And Chris Everett kept saying about Leylah and about Emma Raducanu, who just had this you know, irrepressible teenage joy. She's like, I really hope they still have this 3 years from now.
Yeah,
and it's like they won't. They
won't. No.
And they absolutely won't. Like, they played the U.S. Open. They were both in it. They attended the Met Gala. Like, now they're gonna have to keep it up. You know, and like, that just,
but what
fun. I love this. I love like our podcast because it's just like, come for the sadness, stay for the sadness.
Well, that Osaka quote, I hadn't read that Osaka quote, and we followed the Open really closely this year, and that was my wife.
It was sad. It was sad, but it was true, and I was like, oh my God, she's speaking to me. Like, I feel exactly the same way now. If I preach a good sermon, there's no joy; it's just relief. It's like, oh, thank God I didn't blow it. And like that's not where I want to be.
No.
The guy who figured this out, strangely, it was Andre Agassi, who just like he basically took long hiatuses from his tennis career about 2 or 3 times. And then he would come back, and then he would burn out, and he'd come back and burn out, and come back and burn out, and he finally found some peace later on in his career. But he had a very tortured relationship with the thing that he did best. He sort of hated it, and he's very clear about that in his book Open. So anyway, that's enough sports for today, I
Tennis
suppose.
moment.
Yeah, I was going to say, this has been
You're welcome.
Tennis Corner with RJ Heyman.
Exactly. This has been
Any sport though where it's individual, where all of the
ESPN
dynamics we
hit
talk
me up.
about play out in spades, and that's why they're so interesting. There's a Marty Fish documentary that's on Netflix now. The tennis player. It's about anxiety, and apparently I haven't seen it yet, but I've been told by like 3 people that it is it has all of this written in the skies.
He's not good enough to have his own documentary. He's never won anything.
That's how I that's how I feel about you, RJ.
That's right. Exactly.
Well, let's move on to something even more uplifting. Hannah Anderson, who I've gotten to know a little bit, she wrote in Christianity Today, she wrote, COVID-19 killed our sense of personal progress. It's a great piece. She said, for many of us, making the best use of our time doesn't mean living a purposeful life. It means getting as much done as possible. We multitask and hustle and pursue what Oliver Berkman, one of our heroes, who just wrote a new book called 4,000 Weeks, dubs the fully optimized life. And truthfully, it kind of works. We accomplish a lot. We get stuff done. It works, that is, until a global pandemic hits and our ability to plan comes to a screeching halt. It works until we find ourselves in the same place we were 6 months ago, feeling mocked by progress. It works until death and grief flood our news feeds daily. Whether it's the pastor struggling to hold a fragmenting church together or parents having to weigh their child's education against health concerns, a whole lot of us are on the verge of giving up hope. So many of our expectations, plans, and dreams have been dashed over the last 18 months, never to be recovered. But what if this moment also holds a particular kind of promise? What if the forces disrupting our productivity and sense of control have also opened up an opportunity to engage our lives differently? This strange moment in history, Berkman writes, when time feels so unmoored, might in fact provide the ideal opportunity to reconsider our relationship with it. Christians have not been immune to the gospel of productivity and progress. This is Hannah Anderson writing again. But scriptures, especially Ecclesiastes, remind us that the gospel of progress and productivity is unequal to the realities of life. We live only 4,000 weeks, the majority of them spent on mundane tasks. We are weak, dependent creatures, desperate for the grace and mercy of God. In this moment, we feel our dependence acutely, and that feeling is a gift. Because in this moment, this depressing, disturbing, terrible moment, we have a chance to learn the truth about ourselves and the lives we thought we wanted. More than being good advice, this is good news. The life God calls us to is not one of more work, greater efficiency, and stellar performance. Rather, He invites us to rest by surrendering to the lives and plans He has for us, lives that at times may feel stalled, failing, and limited. Our limits are not strictures holding us back, writes author Ashley Hales, but doorways into intimacy with God. It is only as we acknowledge and embrace the goodness of our limits that we embrace hope. Yeah, I guess again a little sort of downbeat, but at least I felt in her acknowledging of reality, I did feel a sense of hope. I did feel a sense of like embrace, like this. The treadmills we're on of productivity and optimization and just never and stopping, crushing it, killing it, producing. To have those stopped has given some of us a little bit of a chance to reevaluate and maybe think about how the gospel stands in contradistinction to that the gospel of the world, which really is about more, always on, always winning. This struck a chord with me, clearly, but did it strike a chord with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think also it's funny, like the gospel of the world is often confused with the gospel. Just that I think sometimes we actually do think the world is our responsibility to fix. And that we actually have to keep going and keep doing and make it better, and we're not doing enough, and everyone needs to do more. And one blessing of the pandemic is that my world got a whole lot smaller. So it suddenly just became my 2 kids and my husband. And they were actually the only people put into my care that I could help at all. And I'm not sure that shift will go back, if that makes sense. Like that feels like there's a shift that happened for me there that hasn't gone back yet. Part of that is honestly probably the death of my parents, and so I just didn't have the energy for anything beyond my front door. But there are things that I do now that I did not do before the pandemic, or I did really begrudgingly that it's not even like I've willed myself into being happy about it. It's just not, the frustration is not there anymore, which has been such a blessing of like, oh, these are actually the only people you can help. The ones that live in your house.
Well, then all of a sudden you're actually helping them too. Yeah.
You know, like it's like these are the only people like that you can like actually be in their lives, like are the ones who are in your like, and you know, there is something also, and we've talked about this before, but we can really distract ourselves from the problems in our household if we make our if we superhero up our skill set to include healing the whole world, you know, then we can just avoid right what's actually put into our care. So.
That's yeah. And how many stories have you heard of like my mom was the school nurse who helped everyone in the city, but never like had time for me. Or my dad was the pastor who loved everyone in the community, but I never got to see him.
Right.
His name was R.J. Heyman. So.
Yep.
Just kidding.
No, believe me. I'm like, maybe that's.
Hey, RJ talks about winning.
Maybe that will be the story my kids tell.
If he talks about winning again, this is just our duty as Christians to make sure that he knows that in fact he is not winning. He is still the same RJ we love, and we don't love him because he wins. We love him because of how.
Because he's RJ.
Because he's RJ. Belovedness, I think, is what someone said, is how we're valued. Rucker.
Yeah, I wish I was feeling this article. I don't. Yeah, I wish I did, and I understand how someone could. I don't feel like this has been an opportunity for me to do less and pull back. I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, RJ, you like took a church. Like at the beginning of this, so it would be bad just to name it for the church. If when you took the church, you were like, you know what, I'm just gonna hang out with the kids and Jamie. Like
God has really called me into a season of rest. What?
Yeah, I mean, that's
the thing
fair.
is, I have heard of other rectors who were new at their church and were like, oh, you know, I'm participating in a good friends of mine ordination in a foreign country. I'll be gone for a month. I'll see you later. You know, and
I mean, that's ill-advised.
I just don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I feel like I have been no, not about that, but about like my own approach to this pandemic.
Yeah.
I have been scrambling. I've been working my ass off, pardon my French, for like the last year and a half, just trying to figure out how to keep us together and having to reevaluate decisions like on a weekly basis, you know, and I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
I'm exhausted, and I'm also, honestly, I'm kind of exhilarated too. Like part of me is a little worried, like maybe I've just gotten really good at being a crisis pastor, and maybe I'm not going to be a very good non-crisis pastor, you know? I don't know, man. I wish that this had been more, I don't want to say a break or something. It just hasn't been. It hasn't been at all. And there have been a lot of people to take care of, and people who've gotten sick, and people who are shut in, and people who have died.
Yeah.
And you know, funerals that no one could attend.
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out how to live stream baptisms and weddings and funerals because people can't be there. And I don't know, man.
You're making me exhausted just hearing about it.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, I hear you. And that's I think that most of the people I know in church and nonprofit work have felt this way, that they're and we talked about it last week in terms of customer service. Anyone in the service industry, you're not only a restaurant, you're now having to figure out a takeout business as well, and a whole online thing, and it's just like, and you're not getting paid anything more. So
Well, and then to figure out, like, what does the science actually say?
Yeah.
Like, do I, like, give you, I have to become like an amateur epidemiologist, what is the CDC actually saying? What do these numbers actually mean?
Yeah.
Who should be wearing masks? Who should not be wearing
It's
masks? Are people going to be pissed off? How punitive are we going to be with people who just refuse to wear masks? Like,
well,
It's
Yeah.
stressful. It is. But then, like, it's also, I don't know, we were in church this past Sunday, and, like, some people were in masks, some people weren't.
yeah.
And it was just so beautiful to be together.
Totally.
And I know that people are going to
Yes.
hear that and think, like, I sound naive and
I felt the
whatever.
same way on Sunday. Sunday was
I'm like
good.
one of those weird Christians that doesn't believe in science. I believe in the science, but also, like, I believe in the Holy Spirit. And it was really, really good just to be together. And I hear you. It's like, there's such a longing for how we can make that possible. So,
Yeah.
well, let's talk a little more globally right now. There's a remarkable essay in The Point, which is quickly becoming one of my favorite journals. It was by Shivani Radhakrishnan. I hope I'm saying that right. Shivani Radhakrishnan. And it's a essay called Uncertain Terms. And what she's really doing is she's giving an overview of the work of one of my favorite essayists and writers today. Writing is a woman named Megan O'Geeblin. And Megan has a new book out called God, Human, Animal, Machine. God, Human, Animal, Machine. But she also wrote a book called Interior States, and I would love for her to speak at a Mockingbird conference. And what she's dealing, what Shivani is talking about is really the deconversion narrative, which has become a kind of a more and more popular narrative in our culture. People leaving religion behind, personally, et cetera, et cetera. If you've been a person who's been listening to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast that Mike Cosper's been doing, I know it's like been triggering for a lot of people, but it's very interesting. It's become one of the top 10 podcasts on iTunes, and
Really?
yeah.
oh my
yeah.
gosh, everyone's listening.
Jamie's
to
listened to
and
it
I'm
all.
like,
I have not listened to it. I
Just
gotta
tell
do
me
it.
about it. I don't need to listen.
Well,
to that.
every time I've been out on the West Coast, and a lot of times, like as life goes on, this is probably more specific than people need to know, but that church, specifically that one human being, created such devastation in terms of people's personal faith that people, the quote unquote deconstruction movement or the deconversion thing, this guy, as far as I can tell, I'm sure there were some great things that happened there, but he seems to have been personally a catalyst for a lot of it in ways that I've underestimated. Like every time I'm out there, it's like, yeah, I was such and such related to such and such at Mars Hill. And then when that imploded, I decided I hated God, or I decided I hated everything that I'd ever been taught was wrong. It was that wounding to people, but probably because it was that meaningful to people. But be that as it may, you get a lot of these very tidy deconversion stories, which are sort of like, I was really all in here, this imploded, and therefore I am now
I'm all out.
I'm out. There's no like, you're either all in or all out. It's a very Protestant mentality, frankly. But this is we're not talking about Mars Hill, okay? We're talking about Megan O'Geeblin, who's a different sort of writer, and she writes for the Paris Review and for Wired magazine, and she's very sophisticated. But the Shivani, who writes this, Radhakrishnan, who wrote this essay, she said deconversion narratives often follow a trajectory that is suspiciously breezy. Reviews of deconversion stories, like Educated by Tara Westover, Unorthodox, often speak of bravery. Against all odds, the protagonists of such stories inevitably reach a kind of spiritual adulthood. And yet for O'Geeblin, who left Chicago's Moody Bible Institute and the fundamentalist Baptist faith of her upbringing, deconversion was supposed to mean, quote, striding onto terra firma, embracing a world where there would be no more shadows, no more distant echoes, only the blinding and unambiguous light of science and reason. Well, leaving religion meant, she thought, a more straightforward relationship to the world, but as it turns out, that was a false hope. Geeblin continually writes that the material world is every bit as elusive as the superstitions I'd left behind. Interior States, which is her first book, is not a deconversion narrative in its standard form. It's most centrally a book about the stubbornly religious longings that flicker within people even as formal faith dims and disappears. At one point, O'Geeblin turns her energies of spiritual self-betterment on her body. Her search history becomes a compendium of cleanse recipes, high-intensity workouts, and the glycemic index of various exotic fruits. Now, on the face of it, her new book, O'Gieblin's God, Human, Animal, Machine, is a different kind of book. It's a deeply researched work of history, criticism, and philosophy. And it begins in our technological age where, O'Gieblin writes, everything in modern life, from our minds to the rotation of the planets, has become a system to be figured out. Yet insofar as O'Gieblin continues to complicate the conventional deconversion narrative, God, Human, Animal, Machine, and Interior States are part of a continuous project. Taken together, they show that religion isn't a subject matter you can simply move on from, nor does Eblin expect to outgrow her former vantage point as a believer. Instead, her new book probes the uneasy coexistence between what's enchanted and what's disenchanted. In fact, it's really a reflection on how we seek redemption in technology after losing God. She first goes to Ray Kurzweil's Age of Spiritual Machine and invests it with a totemic power. According to Kurzweil, human enhancement and resurrection could still be viable beliefs for a non-religious person. Only this time, that meant uploading your consciousness and then using that as part of your rebirth. O'Gieblin reads Kurzweil's theories of human enhancement and transcending mere life, how he sees the grand narrative history as leading toward nothing short of total re-enchantment. The ideas and promises, the belief that the dead would rise, that the earth would be transformed, that humans would become immortal, sounded to her a lot like Christian eschatology. But if science, in fact, does present itself as a new form of revelation, aren't we just better off going to church? Churches today, she argues, have stopped providing a real alternative to the bleak moral market of contemporary life. Congregations do market research to see what parts of teaching will go over best. That's why many churches stop talking about hell. And a development that O'Gieblin suggests compromises their ability to provide real options to those already living in a market-driven society. This is part of why transhumanism and tech theory are so intriguing to her. They represent appropriately 21st century forms of re-enchantment. Now, I'll stop there. I've got some other things to read from her. But does this strike a chord? Have you heard narratives of deconversion as far as it goes? I feel like my whole project of seculosity was really about how the spiritual impulse finds new targets, sometimes which will eat you alive in different ways than. But maybe not as, now that I hear the Mars Hill fallout, maybe they're less toxic. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think there's a lot of interesting things about these articles to me in juxtaposition. One is that, what she's saying, what the early article said, is that everyone is looking for the same things, right? Everyone is looking for a sense of worth, whether they're seeking it through status or belovedness, and everyone is seeking redemption. It's just a question of where you're going to look, and what can actually deliver. Part of me is tempted to say, if these are the things you want, worth, you want redemption, go and try and find them somewhere else. Go out there and seek it, because I'm pretty sure you're not going to find it anywhere else. Maybe you will, and if you do, Godspeed. But maybe Jesus actually offers something unique. And then the other thought I had was just the frustration that a lot of people feel, and sometimes I do. I hear it more from some other people, just with Christians. Like, what the hell is wrong with Christians? If only Christians weren't so impossible. Catholic Christians, Mars Hill Christians, liberal Christians, conservative Christians, fundy Christians. Like, if only Christians weren't so impossible. And, you just want to say, or what I've wanted to say is, yeah, but, I understand that we're ambassadors for what we say we believe, but Christianity isn't about Christians. It's about Jesus. And if you think Christians are bad, just go get to know anybody else. Like, everyone's a disaster.
Right.
Everyone is going to.
I know a couple disasters.
Everyone's going to betray you. And we don't come to church because we believe in Christians. We come to church as broken people who call ourselves Christians because we look to Jesus, because we think Jesus, among the billions of people who've walked this planet, is unique. He's different than anybody else, which to me seems empirically true. He's just different from anybody. I've said this before. I'm always struck how 2,000 years later, there's really nothing in the ministry of Jesus to which 2,000 years later we say, ooh, that was a bad thing you did there, Jesus. That was something we have to explain away as being something that was, culturally specific to 2,000 years ago. he still seems to have gotten just about everything he did pretty much exactly right, which is crazy to think about. So, yeah, I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say in all that. I'm trying to make an apologetic for Christianity a little bit, and also a way for us as Christians to acknowledge our brokenness and the brokenness of those with whom we follow Jesus together, while also saying that that's not, it's not why we go to church necessarily for other Christians are so great. We go because Jesus is so great.
I think that's a beautiful reminder. The thing that strikes me as so fresh and not so contrary to some of the narratives, and we're going to hear more and more of these narratives. By the way, this is already a genre, the deconversion genre, and it will become more popular because it's sort of, especially, it gives people. It allows us to feel better. And if you're a person who grew up with that sort of baggage, you feel known in those things. And I think there's a certain type of grace that probably is transmitted through that. I think what is the naive part, and the low anthropologist in me says what I think that O'Giblin constantly hones in on, that the sense of maturation and liberation that comes from shucking a religious background, even a really toxic one, it's just talk to me in 10 years. Like that is always, I think, premature, in fact. And I find it to be that sort of, as she calls it, a breezy narrative is as adolescent in how it comes off as any of the things they're rejecting, because life is in fact more complicated. And O'Giblin is one of she's got this gift of communicating the ambivalence of what it means to live with, because we want to believe these things were oppressive, they're ancient, they're hurtful. Life is much sexist. Life is much better without them. And she's basically saying, in some ways yes, in some ways no. And you never quite, if you're honest with yourself, you never actually leave behind a lot of the things that because as much as the problems were external and the systems that were foisted on you, the truth is most of your restlessness and unpleasantness is actually internal.
Well, it reminds me what, and then the last thing I'll say, sorry, Sarah, what Francis Spufford says in his introduction to, Unapologetic about that the new atheist advertisement on the London city buses, which said, there's probably no God, so stop worrying about it and just enjoy your life. And he's like, who exactly is enjoying their life? And if you think that getting rid of God is suddenly going to make your life so much better and more enjoyable, how adolescent is that?
So I do have to say, as a woman, I think it's really important to note that, and this is a thing that I have come to understand as an adult, because I was raised in the Episcopal Church, where people don't have grand, deconversion narratives about the Episcopal Church.
Just like I just stopped.
No, they come to the Episcopal Church when they've suffered a grand deconversion.
They do. Or if they were raised in the Episcopal Church, they just started reading the New York Times on Sunday mornings. They don't have a big moment where they left, it's fascinating to me. But I would say, on that note, that I do know people who were raised in the Episcopal Church who left for, none of these reasons, just because they found something better to do on Sunday morning, brunch, I don't know. And it was the words of the liturgy that they remembered from their childhoods that brought them back. And so I do, as much as we can find all sorts of reasons, to make jokes about the tradition that we are in, for me, I will say, I have to say this as a woman, I have so many women come to me all the time in ministry who were not raised in the Episcopal Church, who have had such, Mars Hill, horrible things happen to them. Assault, awful things that were then justified in that religious context. And they have had to deconstruct that, and it has been horrible. And I do feel really lucky to have been raised in a denomination by parents where that was just not anything I ever experienced.
And they have experienced some liberation on the other side of that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, much needed, really important. What is heartbreaking, though, is then they don't have any, like it all got taken away, right? In that moment. So they don't, even if there was a beautiful sense of faith there, that is so intricately connected that it is gone too, and they're left with nothing. And that is just, gosh, I mean, it's just heart-wrenching. And I feel so, they'll come to me because I'm a woman, and I'm like, I have no capacity. This is so hard and horrible. I'm so sorry. That's kind of all I know to say. But I love this idea of enchanted and disenchanted, because I think we long for enchantment. I think our hearts are like flowers that turn to the sun. Like we are always looking to be enchanted. And the danger in sort of having our own narratives about what's enchanting or how enchantment works is that they're not ours, right? We're all, I mean, to the point of seculosity, we're all sort of consuming and making a religion out of something all the time. So instead of like official religion, right, it's like things we see on Instagram. And then we say things like, well, I don't want to say that out loud because I don't want to speak it into existence. Right? To which I always reply verbally, right to your face when you say nonsense like that to me. That's not how it works. So, like, it's just, that's the thing is like,
the secret.
Yeah, I'm like, that's not how, people will say like, what, God doesn't give us more than we can handle. And I'm like, that's not how it works. Like it's just, that is the danger. And so I live in sort of an in-between space with this just because, when you see especially women who've been victimized by the church, gay people who've been victimized by the church, and they don't want anything to do with the church, you're like, I get it. I get it. But it's just such a bummer. I should have a better word than that. It's such a bummer because everything gets taken away.
Yeah.
And then they're left with Instagram.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. And my tendency, I think the tendency of people in the main line, or at least in my own, who grew up not out really with that same sort of baggage, is to, over time, to start to roll one's eyes and be like, get over it. It's a,
right.
But then I go around and I speak to places and I hear, I think I hear the worst possible stories, and I hear them from every category you've just mentioned, and I hear them just from regular dudes too,
Yeah.
And I think, really, that happened? Like I haven't been turning a straw man out of this sort of sense of this hyper form of legalistic Christianity. I've been underdoing it. And it is created such, whatever decline the church is experiencing is its own fault, like bottom line.
Yes.
But then I sit in church one Sunday, and you're right, I'm sitting in the liturgy, and I hear someone preach, and I hear stories about Jesus, and I'm like, this has nothing to do with what was going on in Seattle, and
This is
really good stuff.
There's some good stuff here.
And there's some life and death here, and there's forgiveness.
Yeah.
And like, this is, wait a second, maybe this whole thing.
And there's like genuine like self-acknowledgement of sin by the preacher. I mean, you know what I mean? There's all these like beautiful, So I appreciate her attempt, O'Gieblin's complicating of the narrative, because, frankly, I'm surrounded by Christians who have other narratives of their lives about victorious living and all that sort of stuff. And they've edited things out, just like the person who left the youth group that I ran into at a wedding 2 weeks ago and just sort of has this whole idea about how terrible youth group was and how terribly victimized they were. And now they're living in the truth. And something's like, well, I've got pictures of you. You look like you're having a blast, and you've clearly forgotten a lot of the good things. You've got your own narrative, and our narratives tend to function as laws and as justification for what we want to believe about ourselves in the moment. And once we get back to reality, that things are both and that we're contributing to these systems as well as being the victims of them. Like you kind of just are like, well, Lord Jesus, have mercy on me. Like I don't really have many answers except for this sounds like nothing else I've ever heard, and it still does. And I'm 42, and I've been hearing about it for 20
my whole life. Maybe that's naive, but I'm trying to think about this a little bit in terms of how churches recover from the pandemic and what brings them back to church.
I don't think it's naive, Dave.
Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, because I don't think it's naive because as many people as have problems with Christians in the church, maybe I'm naive. I don't know that many people that have problems with Jesus. Everyone seems to generally think Jesus
People like him.
is pretty great.
But they don't just like the meek and mild. They're like, hey, he really called out those Pharisees, and he
really did.
And yet he actually ministered
really
to
did
that
love the
woman who
unlovable.
was totally broken down, and like I don't know. It's not just Jesus is just nice, I always think that when people presented with the actual Jesus seem to think, wow, this is something.
Hope.
RJ, don't you have that story of the friend who read the gospel?
My friend who's was like an astrophysics major at Yale and highly educated, and he and I would have discussions. And I'd be like, have you ever read the Bible? He's like, no, I've been meaning to. and so I gave him a copy, and I was like, read the Gospel of Matthew. I saw him a few weeks later. I was like, so what do you think? He's like, whoa. He's like, Jesus is way different than I thought he was.
Yeah.
He's like, he's a wild man.
Yeah.
He's like, and he's like, so I was like, so what do you think about his message? Like, what's his message? He's like, his basic message is, you're all a total disaster, and screw it, you're all forgiven. And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly right. So it still speaks amazingly.
Do you think the folks are going to come back to church one day, RJ?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Dave and I were talking about this a little earlier today. There's been so many. I got an email from a Christian organization, which works with churches to do revitalization work, and the subject line of the email is, "They're not coming back." And I was like, something really fun. And hey, it is true that this past Sunday, we probably had, 60 to 70% of in-person attendance that we had pre-pandemic. But we also had hundreds of people watching online, and I was telling Dave, I was talking with a guy in our church who say that again?
Sorry.
Winning, totally winning. I was talking to a guy at our church who works at a bank, and I said, hey, is the Delta variant just running roughshod through your offices? He said, no, not really. He's like, but RJ, remember, we've got more than 100 people on my floor, and right now only about 5 to 10 are actually coming in person. No one's going back anywhere yet. Except, as Dave said, football games. Apparently, everyone is going to sporting.
They seem to be fine with going to the UVA
seem to be
football
just
games.
fine with that. I just think it's I think it's too soon. I think it's premature. I know we're all tired and we're trying to figure out hybrid, in-person, online strategies and all that sort of stuff. But people are, as I said to Dave, the people who go to church are either older, and so they're scared about the vaccine, or they have children who are too young to be vaccinated, and so they're not scared about the vaccine, scared about the pandemic. And so people are still just scared. People are still just unsure what to do. And I do think they're going to come back. I think once we get to the point where COVID becomes like the flu and people aren't dying so much of it anymore, I don't know. Maybe I'm hopelessly optimistic, but I think people are still around. They're tired and they're mourning.
They're
scared.
traumatized. I think
yes, and that's gonna pass. But I think people are coming back to church as much as they're coming back to anything besides football games. So,
Sarah, do you have any wisdom on that?
I mean, I had as many students join last week as I had when I started this ministry in total.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's definitely a longing for enchantment. I'll say that.
Oh,
and I think it's, my population, of course, is a bit more fearless. They're all vaccinated. And so they don't have the anxiety of being older or having small children. And that's definitely wonderful. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Our church on Sunday morning felt pretty full, I think,
yes.
And happy.
So did ours.
And I do think people come back, and maybe that's naive, but I don't go to church because I'm married to the priest. I know plenty of priest wives who don't go to church. Okay. And I go to church because I need church. And I'm assuming it's not just because I'm like the only needy person on the planet. You know, I'm assuming other people need church.
Yeah,
I don't
I had
know.
a person in tears this week who I called and is battling some health issues, and she's worried about her immune system, and she's crying. She's like, I miss my church. I need my church. I want to come back.
Yes.
But she's scared.
Yeah.
You know?
And I'm with you 100% here, because we had one Sunday where like no people were in church, and then the next Sunday was just jammed. But with students especially, I think that the longing for enchantment, as you say, Sarah, is not going away. In fact, it's only going to strengthen. Also, the longing for a reprieve from the status game is not going away anytime soon. But ultimately, what people are, I think, the longing for for hope and for forgiveness and for everlasting life. I mean, these are not small things that are on offer. When you think of like what was, when you think of the things that drive people away from religion, they are very potent. But the things that drive you to it and to the cross are arguably more potent, and they just are. It's our precise demographic that is under so much pressure, has been suffering, and so much with young kids during this time, and hearing from schools that like you really can't go anywhere if you want your kids to go to school, and the science, everyone doesn't even know what's true, and you're simply exhausted too. And the idea of trying to do another thing on Sunday, it's not the great challenge will be, I think, to people in ministry or people just who care about churches is not to judge those folks, is to stay in touch with them if you can, and also not to, because that's my go-to is to be like, well, screw them, they're not real, like they were just pretending, or like there's a
my go-to is it's all my fault.
Yeah, your go-to, RJ, it's all, or I could just say it's all RJ's fault.
You guys really underestimate how hard it is to be a mother of small children in 2021.
Totally. Yes. Oh my gosh.
I know.
Because I just like, when they don't come to church, I'm like, I get it. Like it's just
it's
like,
a miracle you ever came. And and if you come the day you come back, I'm just gonna to give you so much affection and encouragement.
Yes.
Well, you guys encourage me. And I am just so grateful for you. I'm so glad you're feeling better. And I guess that's all we got. Nobody is enjoying their lives, but the thirst for hope and re-enchantment is real. So, and so is Jesus.
I'm going to go watch Enchanted. That's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to get my Amy Adams on.
Too many times.
Oh my gosh.
RJ.
I love
Don't
that
start with
movie
the Disney
so
stuff
much.
again. You guys are the best, and talk to you soon.
All
Love you.
right.
Bye.
Love you, Dave.
Guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.